Last Days of Socrates with Leo McKern. Part 2.
Ara Dei, pantos peithestai tois nomois?
In Athens, sentence of execution was normally carried out at once. But the day before Socrates' trial was also the first day of the annual mission to Delos, a ceremony to commemorate the exploit of Theseus when he delivered Athens from the yearly tribute of sending young men and women as food for the Cretan Minotaur. While the state galley was absent on this mission, the death penalty could not be inflicted. This year the mission took so long that Socrates was kept in prison for a month, awaiting the day of his execution. Some delay must have been foreseen, and it's possible that Socrates' enemies expected or intended that he should escape and leave the country. His own wealthy friends certainly urged him to do so, as they felt that he had sacrificed himself and them too easily. Socrates in prison.
Socrates ento desmoterio.
A room in the state prison of Athens in the year 399 BC. The time is half an hour before dawn. On a pallet bed against the back wall lies Socrates asleep. Crito, one of his oldest friends, sits patiently on a stool.
Here already, Crito? Surely it's still early.
Indeed it is.
Well, what time?
Just before dawn.
Oh, surprised the warder agreed to let you in.
He's used to me now, Socrates, because I come here so often. Besides, he's under some small obligation to me.
Have you only just come?
No, I've been here some time.
Why didn't you wake me up at once instead of sitting by my bed so quietly?
I wouldn't dream of such a thing, Socrates. I only wish I were not so sleepless and depressed myself. I've been wondering at you because I saw how comfortably you were sleeping, and I deliberately didn't wake you because I wanted you to go on being as comfortable as you could. I've often felt before in the course of my life how fortunate you are in your disposition, but I feel it more than ever now in your present misfortune when I see how easily and placidly you put up with it.
Oh, well, really, Crito, it would be hardly suitable for a man of my age to resent having to die.
Well, other people just as old as you get involved in these misfortunes, Socrates, but their age doesn't keep them from resenting it when they find themselves in your position.
Crito, why have you come so early?
Because I bring bad news, Socrates.
Has the boat come in from Delos?
It hasn't actually come in yet, but I expect that it'll be here today. And so by tomorrow, Socrates, you will have to end your life.
Well, Crito, I hope it may be for the best. If the gods will it so, so be it. All the same, I don't think it will arrive today.
Well, what makes you think that?
Am I right in saying that I have to die on the day after the boat arrives?
Well, that's what the authorities say, at any rate.
And I don't think it will arrive on this day that is just beginning, but on the day after.
Oh?
I'm going by a dream that I had in the night, only a little while ago.
Why, what was the dream about?
I thought I saw a gloriously beautiful woman dressed in white robes. She came up to me and said, "Socrates, to the pleasant land of Thea, on the third day shalt thou come."
Now look here, Socrates. It's still not too late to take my advice and escape. Now, your death means a double calamity for me. I shall not only lose a friend whom I can never possibly replace, but besides, a great many people who don't know you and me very well will be sure to think that I let you down, because I could have saved you if I'd been willing to spend the money. And what could be more contemptible than to get a name for thinking more of money than of your friends? Most people will never believe that you refuse to leave this place, although we tried our hardest to persuade you.
But, my dear Crito, why should we pay so much attention to what most people think? The really reasonable people, who have more claim to be considered, will believe the facts to be exactly as they are.
But you can see for yourself, Socrates, that one has to think of popular opinion as well. Your present position is quite enough to show that the capacity of ordinary people for causing trouble is not confined to petty annoyances, but has hardly any limits if you once get a bad name with them.
I only wish that ordinary people had an unlimited capacity for doing harm. Then they might have an unlimited power for doing good, which would be a splendid thing. Actually, they have neither. They cannot make a man wise or stupid. They simply act at random.
I'll have it that way if you like. But tell me this, Socrates. I hope that you aren't worrying about the possible effects on me and the rest of your friends, and thinking that if you escape, we shall have trouble with informers for having helped you to get away, and have to forfeit all our property, or pay an enormous fine, or even incur some further punishment. If any idea like that is troubling you, you can dismiss it altogether. We are quite entitled to run that risk in saving you, and even worse if necessary. Take my advice and be reasonable.
All that you say is very much in my mind, Crito, and a great deal more besides.
Very well, then. Don't let it distress you. I know some people who are willing to rescue you from here and get you out of the country for quite a moderate sum. And then surely you realize how cheap these informers are to buy off. We shan't need much money to settle them, and I think you've got enough of my money for yourself already. And then, even supposing that in your anxiety for my safety you feel that you oughtn't to spend my money, there are these foreign friends of ours staying in Athens who are quite willing to spend theirs. One of them, Simmias of Thebes, has actually brought the money with him for this very purpose. And Cebes and a number of others are quite ready to do the same. So, as I say, you mustn't let any fears on these grounds make you slacken your efforts to escape. And you mustn't feel any misgivings about what you said at your trial, that you wouldn't know what to do with yourself if you left this country. Wherever you go, there are plenty of places where you will find a welcome. Besides, Socrates, I don't even feel that it is right for you to try to do what you are doing, throwing away your life when you might save it. You are doing your best to treat yourself in exactly the same way as your enemies would, or rather did, when they wanted to ruin you. What is more, it seems to me that you are letting your sons down too. You have it in your power to finish their upbringing and education, and instead of that, you are proposing to go off and desert them, and so far as you are concerned, they'll have to take their chance. And what sort of chance are they likely to get? The sort of thing that usually happens to orphans when they lose their parents. Either one ought not to have children at all, or one ought to see their upbringing and education through to the end. It strikes me that you are taking the line of least resistance, whereas you ought to make the choice of a good man and a brave one, considering that you profess to have made goodness your object all through life. Really, I am ashamed, both on your account and on ours, your friends. It'll look as though we had played something like a coward's part all through this affair of yours. First, There was your decision to come to court when it was quite unnecessary. Then there was the conduct of the defence. And finally, to complete the farce, we get this situation, which makes it appear that we've let you slip out of our hands through some lack of courage and enterprise on our part, because we didn't save you and you didn't save yourself, when it would have been quite possible and practicable. There, Socrates, if you aren't careful, besides the suffering, there will be all this disgrace for you and us to bear. Now come, make up your mind. Really, it's too late for that now. You ought to have made it up already. There is no alternative. The whole thing must be carried through during this coming night. If we lose any more time, it can't be done. It'll be too late. I appeal to you, Socrates, on every ground. Take my advice and please don't be unreasonable.
Oh, my very dear Crito, I appreciate your warm feelings very much. That is, assuming that they have some justification. If not, the stronger they are, the harder they will be to deal with. Very well, then. We must consider whether we ought to follow your advice or not. You know, this is not a new idea of mine. It has always been my nature never to accept advice from any of my friends unless reflection shows that it is the best course that reason offers. I cannot abandon the principles which I used to hold in the past simply because this accident has happened to me. They seem to me to be much as they were, and I respect and regard the same principles now as before. So, unless we can find better principles on this occasion, you can be quite sure that I shall not agree with you. No. Well then, how can we consider the question most reasonably? Suppose that we begin by reverting to this view which you hold about people's opinions. Was it always right to argue that some opinions should be taken seriously, not others? Or was it always wrong? Perhaps it was right before the question of my death arose. But now we can see clearly that it was a mistaken persistence in a point of view which was really irresponsible nonsense. I should like very much to inquire into this problem, Crito, with your help, and to see whether the argument will appear in any different light to me now that I am in this position, or whether it will remain the same, and whether we shall dismiss it or accept it. Serious thinkers, I believe, have always held some such view as the one which I mentioned just now, that some of the opinions which people entertain should be respected and others should not. Now I ask you, Crito, don't you think that this is a sound principle? You are safe from the prospect of dying tomorrow, in all human probability, and you are not likely to have your judgment upset by this impending calamity. So consider then. Don't you think that this is a sound enough principle? That one should not regard all the opinions that people hold, but only some and not others? Well, what do you say? Isn't that a fair statement?
Yes, it is.
In other words, one should regard the good ones and not the bad.
Yes.
The opinions of the wise being good, the opinions of the foolish bad.
Naturally.
To pass on then. Do you remember the illustration that I used to employ? When a man is in training and taking it seriously, does he pay attention to all praise and criticism and opinion indiscriminately? Or only when it comes from the one qualified person, the actual doctor or trainer?
Only when it comes from the one qualified person.
Then he should be afraid of the criticism and welcome the praise of the one qualified person, but not those of the general public. Well, now, tell me, Crito, does this apply as a general rule, and above all to the sort of actions which we're trying to decide about? Just and unjust, honorable and dishonorable, good and bad? Ought we to be guided and intimidated by the opinion of the many, or by that of the one, assuming that there is some one with expert knowledge? Is it true that we ought to respect and fear this person more than all the rest put together? and that if we do not follow his guidance, we shall spoil and mutilate that part of us which, as we used to say, is improved by right conduct and destroyed by wrong. Or is this all nonsense?
No, I think it is true, Socrates.
Then consider the next step. There is a part of us which is improved by healthy actions and ruined by unhealthy ones. If we spoil it by taking the advice of non-experts, will life be worth living when this part is once ruined? And the part I mean is the body. Do you accept it?
Yes.
Well, is life worth living with a body which is worn out and ruined in health?
Certainly not.
What about that part of us which is mutilated by wrong actions and benefited by right ones? Is life worth living with this part ruined? Or do we believe that this part of us, whatever it might be, in which right and wrong operate, is of less importance than the body?
Certainly not.
Is it really more precious?
Oh, much more.
In that case, my dear fellow, what we ought to consider is not so much what people in general will say about us, but how we stand with the expert in right and wrong, the one authority who represents the actual truth. So, in the first place, your proposition is not correct when you say that we should consider popular opinion in questions on what is right and honorable and good, or the opposite. Of course, one might object and say, all the same, the people have the power to put us to death.
No doubt about that. It's quite true, Socrates. It is a possible objection.
But so far as I can see, my dear fellow, the argument which we have just been through is quite unaffected by it. At the same time, I should like you to consider whether we are still satisfied on this point, that the really important thing is not simply to live, but to live well.
Yes.
And that to live well means the same thing as to live honorably or rightly.
Yes.
Then, in the light of this agreement, we must consider whether or not it is right for me to try to get away without an official discharge. If it turns out to be right, we must make the attempt. If not, we must let it drop.
Well, I agree with what you say, Socrates, but I wish you would consider what we ought to do.
Let us look at it together, my dear fellow. And if you can challenge any of my arguments, do so, and I will listen to you. But if you can't, be a good fellow and stop telling me over and over again that I ought to leave this place without official permission. I'm very anxious to obtain your approval before I adopt the course which I have in mind. I don't want to act against your convictions. So now give your attention to the starting point of this inquiry. I hope that you will be satisfied with my way of stating it, and try to answer the questions to the best of your judgment.
Well, I will try.
Do we say that one must never willingly do wrong, or does it depend upon circumstances? Is it true, as we have often agreed before, that there is no sense in which wrongdoing is good or honorable?
Yes, it is.
Then in no circumstances must one do wrong.
No.
And though most people believe the opposite, one must not even do wrong when one is wrong oneself.
Apparently not.
Ought one to do injuries or not?
Oh, surely not, Socrates.
So, it is never right to do a wrong, or return a wrong, or defend oneself against injury by retaliation. I have held this for a long time and still hold it. But if you have formed any other opinion, say so and tell me what it is. If, on the other hand, you stand by what we have said, listen to my next point.
Yes, I stand by it and agree with you.
Well, here is my next question.
Go on.
Ought one to fulfill all one's agreements, provided that they are right, or break them?
One ought to fulfill them.
Then consider the logical consequence. If we leave this place without first persuading the state to let us go, are we or are we not doing an injury, and doing it in a quarter where it is least justifiable? Are we or are we not abiding by our agreements?
I can't answer your question, Socrates. I am not clear in my mind.
Look at it this way. Suppose that while we were preparing to run away from here, we were suddenly confronted by the laws and constitution of Athens, who asked us this question. Now, Socrates, what are you proposing to do? Can you deny that by this act which you are contemplating you intend, so far as you have the power, to destroy us, the laws, and the whole state as well? Do you imagine that a city can continue to exist and not be turned upside down if the legal judgments which are pronounced in it have no force, but are nullified and destroyed by private persons? How shall we answer this question, Crito? Shall we say, yes, I do intend to destroy the laws because the state wronged me by passing a faulty judgment at my trial? Is this to be our answer, or what?
Exactly what you have said, Socrates.
Then, what supposing the law says? Was there provision for this in the agreement between you and us, Socrates? Or did you undertake to abide by whatever judgments the state pronounced? Come now, Socrates. What charge do you bring against us and the state that you are trying to destroy us? Did we not give you life in the first place? Was it not through us that your father married your mother and begot you? Tell us, have you any complaint against those of us laws that deal with marriage? No, none, I should say. Well, have you any against the laws which deal with children's upbringing and education, such as you had yourself? No, I should say. Very good. Then, since you have been born and brought up and educated, can you deny in the first place that you were our child and our servant, both you and your ancestors? And if this is so, do you imagine that what is right for us is equally right for you, and that whatever we tried to do to you, you are justified in retaliating? You did not have equality of rights with your father or your employer to enable you to retaliate. You were not allowed to answer back when you were scolded or to hit back when you were beaten. Do you expect to have such license against your country and its laws that if we try to put you to death in the belief that it is the right thing to do, you on your part will try your hardest to destroy your country and us its laws in return? And will you, Socrates, the true devotee of goodness, claim that you are justified in doing so? Are you so wise as to have forgotten that compared with your mother and father and all the rest of your ancestors, your country is something far more precious, more venerable, more sacred, and held in greater honor both among gods and among all reasonable men? Do you not realize that you are even more bound to respect and placate the anger of your country than your father's anger? That if you cannot persuade your country, you must do whatever it orders, and patiently submit to any punishment that it imposes, whether it be flogging or imprisonment. And if it leads you out to war to be wounded or killed, you must comply, and it is right that you should do so. You must not give way or retreat or abandon your position, both in war and in the law courts and everywhere else. You must do whatever your city and your country commands, or else persuade it in accordance with universal justice. But violence is a sin, even against your parents, and it is a far greater sin against your country. Well, what shall we say to this, Crito? That what the law says is true, or not?
Yes, I think so.
Consider then, Socrates, the laws would probably continue, that any Athenian, on attaining to manhood and seeing for himself the political organization of the state and us, its laws, is permitted, if he is not satisfied with us, to take his property and go away wherever he likes. On the other hand, if any one of you stands his ground, when he can see how we administer justice and the rest of our public organization. We hold that by doing so, he has in fact undertaken to do anything that we tell him. And we maintain that anyone who disobeys is guilty of doing wrong on 3 separate counts. First, because we are his parents. Secondly, because we are his guardians. And thirdly, because, after promising obedience, he is neither obeying us nor persuading us to change our decision if we are at fault in any way. And although all our orders are in the form of proposals, not of savage commands, and we give him the choice of either persuading us or doing what we say, he is actually doing neither. These are the charges, Socrates, to which we say that you will be liable if you do what you are contemplating. And you will not be the least culpable of your fellow countrymen, but one of the most guilty. If I said, "Why do you say that?" they would no doubt pounce upon me with perfect justice and point out that there are very few people in Athens who have entered into this agreement with them as explicitly as I have. "But Socrates," they would say, "we have substantial evidence that you are satisfied with us and with the state. You would not have been so exceptionally reluctant to cross the borders of your country if you had not been exceptionally attached to it. Furthermore, even at the time of your trial, you could have proposed the penalty of banishment if you had chosen to do so. That is, you could have done then, with the sanction of the state, what you are now trying to do without it. But whereas at that time you made a noble show of indifference if you had to die, and in fact preferred death, as you said, to banishment, now you show no respect for your earlier professions, and no regard for us, the laws, whom you are trying to destroy. You are behaving like the lowest type of menial, trying to run away in spite of the contracts and undertakings by which you agreed to live as a member of our state. Now first answer this question, Socrates. Are we or are we not speaking the truth when we say that you have undertaken, indeed, if not in word, to live your life as a citizen in obedience to us? What are we to say to that, Crito? Are we not bound to admit it?
We cannot help it, Socrates.
Incidentally, they will say, Crito, incidentally, you will confirm the opinion of the jurors who tried you that they gave a correct verdict. Because a destroyer of laws might very well be supposed to have a destructive influence upon young and foolish human beings. Do you intend then to avoid well-governed states and the higher forms of human society? And if you do, will life be worth living? Or will you approach these people and have the impudence to converse with them? What arguments will you use, Socrates? The same which you used here, that goodness and integrity, institutions and laws are the most precious possessions of mankind. Do you not think that Socrates and everything about him will appear in a disreputable light? And will no one comment on the fact that an old man of your age, probably with only a short time left to live, should dare to cling so greedily to life at the price of violating the most stringent laws? No, Socrates. Be advised by us, your guardians, and do not think more of your children or of your life or of anything else than you think of what is right, so that when you enter the next world, you may have all this to plead in your defense before the authorities there. Do not take Crito's advice, Socrates, but follow ours. Yes, that, my dear friend Crito, I do assure you, is what I seem to hear them saying. Just as a mystic seems to hear the strains of music, and the sound of their arguments rings so loudly in my head that I cannot hear the other side. I warn you that as my opinion stands at present, it will be useless to urge a different view. However, if you think that you will do any good by it, say what you like.
No, Socrates. I have nothing to say.
Then give it up, Crito. And let us follow this course, since God points out the way.
Ea toinun o Criton, kai pratomen taute, epeide taute hoteos hyphegetai.